What happens when a pop icon's carefully crafted image collides with a morning show host's relentless questioning? The answer involves raised voices, uncomfortable silences, and a walkout that left everyone in the studio speechless. Before we dive into this explosive encounter, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered Gwen's reaction. The Today Show studio buzzed with its usual pre-segment energy as Gwen Stefani settled into the iconic orange couch across from Jenna Bush Hager, what was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance for her latest music project quickly transformed into television gold, and not the kind anyone was expecting. "Gwen, it's so wonderful to have you back," Jenna began with her signature warm smile, her notes perfectly arranged on the coffee table between them. "Your fans are absolutely thrilled about your return to music. But I have to ask, after all these years, what made you decide now was the right time?" Gwen's perfectly glossed lips curved into what could barely be called a smile. "Well, Jenna, music has always been my first love. It never really left me, you know. Sometimes life takes you in different directions, but the creative spirit, it finds a way back." "That's beautiful," Jenna nodded, but her expression shifted slightly, a hint of something more probing entering her voice. "Speaking of life taking you in different directions, your personal life has certainly been in the spotlight recently. How do you balance being authentic in your music while maintaining privacy about your relationships?" The question landed with an almost audible thud. Gwen's posture straightened imperceptibly, her fingers tightening around the coffee mug she'd been casually holding. "I think that's always been the challenge for any artist, right? You want to be real, but you also want to protect the people you care about." Jenna leaned forward slightly, sensing an opening. "Of course, but when you're writing songs about love and heartbreak, aren't you essentially inviting people into those private moments? Your new single, for instance, seems to reference some very personal experiences." "Music is about emotion," Gwen replied, her voice maintaining its professional warmth, but with an underlying tension. "People connect with emotions, not necessarily with specific details of someone's life. When I write, I'm thinking about universal feelings that everyone can relate to." "But surely some of those universal feelings come from very specific places," Jenna pressed, her journalistic instincts clearly engaged. "Your fans have been speculating about certain lyrics, especially the line about rebuilding trust. That feels pretty specific." Gwen set her coffee mug down with deliberate care, the soft clink against the saucer somehow amplified in the suddenly charged atmosphere. "I think you might be reading too much into things, Jenna. Songs are stories, and sometimes stories are just stories." "Are they, though?" Jenna's smile never wavered, but there was steel beneath the sweetness now. "I mean, your entire career has been built on authenticity, on being real with your audience. Don't speak just a girl. These weren't just stories. They came from real places, real pain, real experiences." The comparison hit its mark. Gwen's carefully controlled expression flickered, revealing something raw underneath. "Those songs were from a different time in my life, when I was younger and maybe less aware of how public my private moments could become." "So you're saying you've become more guarded now?" "I'm saying I've become more protective of the people I love." The exchange crackled with unspoken tension. Viewers at home could sense they were witnessing something unscripted, something real breaking through the polished veneer of morning television. Jenna, to her credit, recognized the moment but couldn't seem to resist pushing further. "That's understandable, especially given some of the challenges you've faced publicly. But doesn't that create a disconnect with your audience? They fell in love with the Gwen Stefani who wore her heart on her sleeve." Gwen's laugh was sharp, devoid of humor. "Maybe they fell in love with a version of me that was easier to consume." "Real life is messier than 3-minute songs, Jenna." "Is that what this new music is about then? The messiness of real life?" "This new music is about moving forward," Gwen said firmly. "It's about growth, about finding joy again, about not letting other people's narratives define who you are." The last part carried extra weight, and Jenna caught it immediately. Her eyebrows raised almost imperceptibly. "Other people's narratives? Are you referring to media coverage?" "I'm referring to the tendency people have to reduce complex human experiences into simple storylines that fit their preconceptions. The studio fell into one of those pregnant silences that television hosts dread, where the normal flow of conversation hits an unexpected wall. Jenna glanced at her notes, clearly recalibrating, while Gwen sat with the poise of someone who had just drawn a line in the sand. Jenna recovered quickly from the uncomfortable pause, her media training kicking in as she attempted to steer the conversation back to safer territory. Well, speaking of moving forward, your collaboration with some of today's biggest artists has been incredible to watch. How do you find working with a new generation of musicians? But Gwen wasn't ready to let the previous tension dissipate so easily. It's refreshing, actually, working with people who are more interested in the music than in dissecting my personal history for entertainment value. The barb landed exactly where it was intended. Jenna's professional smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I think our viewers are interested in you as a complete person, Gwen, not just as a performer. That's what makes for compelling television. Compelling for who exactly? Gwen's voice carried a new edge. Because I'm sitting here trying to talk about my art, my creative process, my growth as an artist, and we keep circling back to tabloid speculation. I wouldn't characterize my questions as tabloid speculation, Jenna replied, her own tone cooling. These are legitimate inquiries about how personal experiences influence artistic expression. It's the same conversation we have with every musician who sits on this couch. Really? Because I don't remember you asking the last male artist who was here about rebuilding trust or wearing his heart on his sleeve. Gwen's posture had shifted entirely now, from relaxed promotional mode to something much more confrontational. Funny how those questions always seem to find their way to women. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Several crew members exchanged glances, recognizing that the interview had veered into uncharted territory. Jenna's co-hosts, who had been quietly observing from their positions, suddenly looked more alert. That's not fair, Jenna responded, her voice gaining strength. We ask all our guests about their inspirations and personal journeys. It's part of understanding their artistry. No, what's not fair is reducing a woman's decades-long career to relationship drama, Gwen shot back. I've sold millions of records. I've built a fashion empire. I've mentored countless young artists. But somehow we always end up talking about my love life, like it's the most interesting thing about me. Your personal experiences are part of your story. Gwen, you've never shied away from that before. There's a difference between sharing what I choose to share and having my privacy invaded under the guise of journalism. Gwen's voice was rising now, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. And there's definitely a difference between discussing my art and fishing for gossip. Jenna leaned back slightly, clearly caught off guard by the intensity of Gwen's response. I'm not fishing for gossip. I'm trying to have an authentic conversation with someone who has been refreshingly honest throughout her career. Honest about what I chose to be honest about, Gwen clarified sharply. But apparently that's not enough anymore. Now I have to defend my right to privacy while simultaneously being criticized for not being open enough. It's exhausting. The raw emotion in her voice was unmistakable now. This wasn't the polished pop star delivering practiced sound bites. This was someone who had been pushed to their limit. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of the increasingly heated exchange. I understand your frustration, Jenna said, attempting to regain control of the situation. But when you put yourself in the public eye, when you choose to be a public figure, there's a certain level of interest that comes with that territory. Interest, yes. Intrusion, no. Gwen's eyes flashed, and the idea that choosing to share my talent with the world means I forfeit my right to boundaries is exactly the kind of toxic thinking that makes artists want to disappear entirely. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. Isn't it, though? Because every question you've asked has been designed to get me to reveal something personal, something private, something that has nothing to do with why I'm actually here. Gwen gestured toward the promotional materials for her new music that sat untouched on the table. I came here to talk about my album, about the music I've poured my heart into, about the message I want to share with my fans. Instead, I'm being interrogated about my private life. The word interrogated seemed to strike Jenna like a physical blow. Her professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing genuine offense. Interrogated? Gwen, I'm doing my job. I'm having a conversation. Your job is supposed to be about entertainment and information, not exploitation, Gwen replied without missing a beat. And right now, this feels a lot more like the latter. The accusation of exploitation sent a visible ripple through the studio. This wasn't just a disagreement about interview tactics anymore. This was a fundamental clash over media ethics and celebrity privacy. Jenna's producers could be seen in the background making urgent gestures, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage what had become a public relations nightmare. I resent the implication that I'm exploiting you, Jenna said, her voice tight with controlled anger. I'm a professional journalist, and I conduct interviews with integrity. Then maybe you should examine what integrity means in this context, Gwen replied coolly. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you're more interested in creating a moment than in actually listening to what I have to say. The tension in the studio had become palpable, with crew members frozen in place and Jenna's co-hosts exchanging worried glances. What had started as a routine morning show appearance had transformed into something much more volatile. Creating a moment? Jenna repeated, her voice rising with indignation. Gwen, I've been nothing but respectful. I've asked questions that any entertainment journalist would ask. If you can't handle basic questions about your career and inspirations, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews at all. The suggestion that she couldn't handle interviews struck Gwen like a match to gasoline. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. Excuse me? I've been doing interviews longer than some people have been alive. I know the difference between legitimate journalism and sensationalism masquerading as conversation. Then enlighten me, Jenna challenged, her professional facade finally cracking completely. Because I'm genuinely confused about what line I've crossed here. I asked about your music. I asked about your inspiration. I asked about your growth as an artist. Those aren't invasive questions. The way you asked them was invasive, Gwen shot back immediately. The assumptions behind them, the implications, the fishing for specific details about my personal relationships. Don't pretend you don't know exactly what you were doing. I was doing my job, which is to have interesting conversations with interesting people. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe the problem isn't with my questions. The suggestion that the problem was with Gwen's reaction rather than the questioning itself seemed to be the final straw. She stood up abruptly, her microphone pack catching slightly on the couch cushion. You know what? You're absolutely right. I am uncomfortable, and I should be. Because this entire conversation has been about reducing me to gossip material instead of respecting me as an artist. Jenna remained seated, but her posture was rigid with barely controlled frustration. Sit down, Gwen. Let's finish this conversation like adults. Like adults? Gwen's voice carried a note of incredulity. Adults respect each other's boundaries. Adults don't disguise invasive personal questions as professional journalism. And adults certainly don't tell other adults to sit down when they've clearly expressed discomfort with the direction of a conversation. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. What had begun with Jenna in the driver's seat as the interviewer had transformed into something where Gwen held all the cards, and everyone knew it. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of the unprecedented confrontation. I'm not disguising anything, Jenna insisted, finally rising from her own seat. I'm being transparent about my interest in understanding who you are as a person, not just as a performer. That's what good interviews do. Good interviews make their subjects feel heard and respected, not cornered and exploited, Gwen countered. Good interviews focus on what the guest wants to discuss, not on what will generate the most clicks and social media buzz. So now I'm exploiting you for clicks? Jenna's voice was sharp with offense. That's a serious accusation, Gwen. It's a serious situation, Gwen replied without backing down. And the fact that you're more concerned about the accusation than about examining your own behavior tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. The exchange had reached a fever pitch, with both women standing now, facing each other across the coffee table that had become a symbolic barrier between their opposing viewpoints. The studio audience, if there had been one, would have been silent with shock. As it was, the crew seemed to be holding their collective breath. My priorities are creating engaging content for our viewers, while treating our guests with professionalism and respect, Jenna stated firmly. If you can't appreciate that distinction, then perhaps you're not ready for this level of media engagement. The challenge was unmistakable, and it landed exactly as Jenna intended. Gwen's expression shifted from anger to something colder, more calculating. Not ready for media engagement? I've been navigating media engagement since before you were out of college. I know exactly what professional respect looks like, and this isn't it. Then what would you call it? I'd call it a cautionary tale about what happens when hosts prioritize drama over dignity. Gwen began reaching for her purse, her movements deliberate and final. I'd call it an example of why artists increasingly choose alternative platforms to connect with their fans. The threat was implicit but clear, and it hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Jenna's face flushed with a combination of anger and embarrassment as the full implications of Gwen's words sank in. "Are you seriously going to walk out over this?" Jenna asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "Over a professional interview?" "I'm going to walk out over the lack of professionalism in this interview," Gwen corrected. "There's a difference, and the fact that you can't see it proves my point." She slung her purse over her shoulder with finality, the gesture as definitive as a judge's gavel. The microphone pack that had been attached to her clothing was carefully unclipped and placed on the coffee table with deliberate precision. "Gwen, please!" Jenna made one last attempt, her voice softening slightly. "Let's take a breath and reset. We can find a way to make this work." But Gwen was already shaking her head, her decision clearly made. "Some things can't be reset, Jenna. Some lines, once crossed, change the entire dynamic of a relationship. And frankly, I don't think you even realize which lines you've crossed." The silence that followed Gwen's words was deafening. Everyone in the studio seemed frozen in place, waiting to see if this unprecedented moment would somehow resolve itself or spiral completely out of control. "Which lines?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying an undercurrent of genuine confusion mixed with defensive anger. "Tell me exactly which lines I crossed so I can understand what just happened here." Gwen paused in her preparation to leave, turning back to face Jenna with an expression that mixed disappointment with resignation. "The line between curiosity and intrusion. The line between professional interest and personal exploitation. The line between respecting your guest's comfort level and pushing for television moments regardless of the human cost." "I never intended any human cost," Jenna protested, her voice gaining strength. "I was trying to have a meaningful conversation." "Intent doesn't negate impact," Gwen replied sharply, "and the impact of this conversation has been to make me feel like a specimen under a microscope, rather than an artist sharing her work. The impact has been to prioritize your show's content over my comfort as a human being." Jenna's co-hosts finally broke their silence, with one of them stepping forward cautiously. "Maybe we can all take a moment here and find some common ground." But Gwen held up a hand, stopping the intervention before it could begin. "Common ground requires mutual respect, and that was lost somewhere around the third time I tried to redirect this conversation back to my music and was ignored." "We didn't ignore you," Jenna insisted, desperation creeping into her voice as she realized the situation was truly beyond salvage. "We were building context for your music." "Context?" Gwen repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Because it felt like you were building a narrative. That had nothing to do with what I actually wanted to share and everything to do with what you thought would be more entertaining for your audience." The accusation hit its mark with surgical precision. Jenna's face flushed deeper, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure cracked entirely. "Entertainment is part of what we do here, yes. But that doesn't mean we don't take our responsibilities seriously." "Your responsibility was to make me feel comfortable enough to give you a good interview," Gwen countered. "Instead, you made me feel like I needed to defend myself against implications and assumptions that had no place in a promotional appearance." She took a step toward the exit, then paused, turning back one final time. You know what the saddest part of this whole thing is? I actually have incredible things to share about this new music, about the creative process, about the collaboration with these amazing artists. Stories that would have been genuinely interesting and inspiring for your viewers. But we'll never get to those stories now because you were too busy trying to create drama. The words hung in the air like an indictment, not just of the interview but of the entire approach to celebrity journalism that had led to this moment. Jenna stood frozen, clearly struggling between her professional instincts to salvage the situation and her personal anger at being called out so publicly. "Gwen, please don't leave like this," she made one final plea. "Give us another chance to get this right." But Gwen was already moving toward the exit, her decision final and irreversible. Some opportunities don't get second chances. Some moments reveal too much about character and priorities to simply be reset with good intentions. As she reached the edge of the set, she turned back one last time, addressing not just Jenna but the entire production team. "I hope you'll think about this conversation when your next guest sits on that couch. I hope you'll remember that behind every celebrity persona is a human being who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, not as content to be mined for entertainment value." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and a host who stood alone next to an empty couch. The untouched promotional materials for Gwen's new album serving as a stark reminder of the opportunity that had been lost. Jenna remained motionless for several long seconds, the weight of what had just transpired settling over her like a heavy blanket. The cameras had captured every moment, every word, every emotion of the confrontation that would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about morning show moments in recent memory. Finally, she turned to face the camera directly, her professional training kicking in even as her voice carried the strain of the encounter. "We'll be right back after this break," she managed, though her usual warmth was notably absent. As the cameras cut away and the studio lights dimmed slightly, the full magnitude of what had just occurred began to sink in for everyone present. This wasn't just a difficult interview or a celebrity having a bad day. This was a fundamental breakdown in the relationship between media and celebrity, played out in real time for all to witness. The empty couch where Gwen had been sitting just moments before seemed to symbolize more than just one artist's departure. It represented a larger question about boundaries, respect, and the price of fame in an era where every personal detail had become fair game for public consumption. What started as a routine promotional appearance had become something much more significant, a moment that would be analyzed and discussed long after the initial shock had worn off. And in the end, it raised uncomfortable questions that neither host nor audience could easily answer about the true cost of entertainment and the line between public interest and private dignity. The interview was over, but the conversation it started was just beginning. What do you think really caused Gwen to reach her breaking point? Was it justified or an overreaction? Subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.